Hello everybody and welcome to this video on simple, compound and complex sentences. Now it's really important for you to understand how to use all of these different sentences within your writing. At GCSE level you need to show the examiner that you can use a variety of different sentence structures in order to get the higher grades. So let's go through what each of these sentences is, and you can also see some examples. So starting with simple sentences, a simple sentence is also called an independent clause. It contains a subject and a verb and it expresses a complete thought, so it has to make sense. So here we've got an example, the teacher stared at Andrew. So the subject is the teacher, the verb is to stare, so stared, and Andrew within this sentence is an object. So actually, if we looked at this sentence, we could get rid of at Andrew and just have the teacher stared, and it would still make complete sense. So it just has to have a subject and a verb for it to be a simple sentence. It has to make sense and express a complete thought. So if we take that up a level and go to compound sentences, a compound sentence refers to a sentence made up of two independent clauses. So having just looked at simple sentences, we know that an independent clause is also a simple sentence. So it's two simple sentences connected together with what we call a coordinating conjunction. And that's just a word, a type of word. So here we've got for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So if we take two simple sentences and they talk about a related idea, we can join them with a coordinating conjunction and make it into a compound sentence. So here we've got the example of the bus pulled into the station but didn't collect any passengers. So we've actually got two simple sentences there. The bus pulled into the station, it didn't collect any passengers, but we've joined them together with a coordinating conjunction, which is but, and we've made it into a compound sentence. Okay, so those two types of sentences you probably will have used in your writing all the way up to GCSE level without even realising. It's complex sentences, which are the next one we're going to look at, which you really need to use to show the examiner that you can write at that higher level. So a complex sentence, like a compound sentence, also expresses two or more ideas. So they're made up of several parts, and we call these clauses. Now at least one of these will be the main clause. Now that part of the sentence makes sense on its own, and that contains the main information within the sentence. There'll also be one or more subordinate clauses which give extra information about what is happening. Okay, now that subordinate clause cannot make sense without the main clause. So let's have a look at some subordinating conjunctions. Now, these subordinating conjunctions, you can use these to make your complex sentences. So we can use these words at the beginning or the end of the sentence, so we can shift our subordinate clause from the beginning, the middle or the end. So whenever you use any of these words within a sentence, you'll always get a complex sentence. The subordinate clause, like I said, can come at the beginning of the sentence, the middle, it cannot be split in two, or it can be sandwiched in the middle or come at the end. So let's have a look at these subordinate clauses in blue. So here we've got the subordinate clause at the beginning with the subordinating conjunction although at the beginning. So we've got although he was well fed, the dog howled. Now the dog howled here is our simple sentence, our main clause, but we've added some extra information here, which is our subordinate clause, and we've explained that he was actually well fed, but he howled despite being well fed. And this is our subordinate clause. Now, if the subordinate clause comes at the beginning of your sentence, you have to have a comma at the end of that subordinate clause. And think of that comma as like glue holding the sentence together. Okay, so if the subordinating conjunction comes at the beginning of the sentence, you have to have a comma at the end of the subordinate clause. So here we've got the subordinate clause at the end. The dog howled although he was well fed. So all we've done is we've just shifted the clauses round and put that subordinate clause at the end. Now, if the subordinating conjunction comes in the middle of the sentence, okay, in other words, your subordinate clause comes at the end of your sentence, you don't need a comma because your subordinate conjunction here is acting like your glue, just like the comma did there. It's acting like the glue to hold the sentence together, so you don't need a comma within this sentence. Here we've got the subordinate clause sandwiched in the middle. I call this the sandwich technique. We've got the dog, although he was well fed, howled loudly. And there you need your two commas to sandwich, to glue your subordinate clause into that sentence. And finally, we've got this subordinate clauses at the beginning and at the end. Although the cat had just eaten, the cat paced back and forth in front of the fishbowl, hungrily staring at my goldfish. And again, we've got comma at the end of this subordinate clause and a comma here, just to hold those clauses all together in that sentence. So there are various ways we can make a complex sentence. So I've just made a list here. If you want to take a note of it, then it might be useful in the future. So you can make a complex sentence if you start with two adjectives. You can start your sentence with an ly word, which is an adverb. You can start with an ing word, which is a verb, or you can end with an ing word, which is obviously a verb coming at the end of the sentence. You can do a sandwich technique, which I've just shown you, where you add extra information about the person, place, or object that you're talking about. You can add a prepositional phrase at the beginning, saying where or when something is taking place. You can start with your subordinating conjunction, or you can end with your subordinating conjunction, and you can also start with a simile. So if you look at all of those different ways, you can always make a complex sentence in a variety of different ways. So now let's have a look at some examples of these different types. So at the top there, we've got a complex sentence that starts with two adjectives. So we've taken the subject of the sentence, Beth, and we've used two adjectives to describe Beth. So we've said exhausted and frustrated, Beth continued to work through her algebra homework. So we've added extra information in the form of a subordinate clause at the beginning, and we need our comma there to glue that sentence together. Here we've started with an adverb, so we've explained that Simon carelessly tossed the can of Coke in the general direction of the bin, but we've added a subordinate clause at the beginning of the sentence, and again the comma comes after the subordinating conjunction to glue that sentence together. Here we started with a verb, an ing word, and we said walking away from the school for the last time, Lucy wondered if she would ever set foot through the doors again. Okay, so again, our subordinate clause comes at the beginning of that sentence. Now, make note of the fact that these main clauses, if we didn't have these subordinate clauses at the beginning, these main clauses would still make sense on their own. So Beth continued to work through her algebra homework makes complete sense because we've got subject and we've got a verb there to work. So we've got the subject and the verb within the main clause. The subordinate clause, if we didn't have the main clause, would just read exhausted and frustrated. So that's the part that doesn't make sense. Okay, so we know that that is our extra information. Right, so here we've got our subordinating conjunction coming in the middle of the sentence. We're having our ing word at the end. So we've got Sam hastily ran away from the dog, wondering if he would make it to the safety of the school gates. So in this sentence, we don't require a comma here because we've got our subordinating conjunction gluing that sentence together. Here we've got the sandwich technique, so we've got some extra information about the subject within this, and that is the door. So the door, which had obviously been untouched for years, was covered in a thick matted coat of ivy and moss. And if we take that subordinate clause out of the middle of our sentence and read it, it says the door was covered in a thick matted coat of ivy and moss, and that makes sense, and that's how we know that our main clause has been split in two with our sandwich technique subordinate clause. Here we've got a complex sentence using a prepositional phrase. So we've got at the front of the class, Josh, the new boy, nervously grasped his hands and stared at the floor. We've got, while walking to the sweet shop, Emily dreamed about the treats which she could purchase with her birthday money. Okay, so we've got starting with a subordinating conjunction. This one here, we've got Karen guzzled the chocolate bar even though she knew she was on a diet. So this is our ending with a subordinating conjunction type. And again, we don't need our comma in there because our subordinating conjunction is the glue holding the sentence together. And finally, we've got a simile here at the beginning. Like a pack of wolves, the schoolboys descended on the dining hall, ravenous and determined to get their lunch. We could actually end the sentence just here and that would make sense, and we'd have our subordinate clause at the beginning and then our main clause, but we've actually added an extra bit of information at the end with two adjectives, ravenous and determined. So we've actually got two subordinate clauses within this sentence. So if you want to make a note of those, please do. They're really, really good examples of all of the different types of complex sentences. And when you're writing a piece of either an essay or an example for your teacher or an answer for an exam, anything, if you're writing anything at all, you need to show the person who's marking it that you can use a variety of these different sentences. Okay, so this is a really cool type of sentence. This is the compound complex sentence. Now, this type of sentence has at least two independent or main clauses, so two parts of the sentence that make sense, and at least one dependent, which is a subordinate clause. So here we've got, although I like to go camping, which is your subordinate clause. It starts with the subordinating conjunction, and therefore we have a comma here. I haven't had the time to go lately. That's our first main clause. And that's our coordinating conjunction in the middle. I haven't found anyone to go with. So if you've got a compound sentence, you can add a subordinate clause to that compound sentence, and that will make it into a compound complex sentence. So again, a different type of sentence you can use within your writing. So what I've done here is I'm giving you a little exercise to do, so please pause the video, and what I want you to do is I want you to figure out which sentences these are. So are they simple, compound or complex? So just make a list, and then in part 2 of this video series I will give you the answers to these questions. Okay, with this exercise, this practice exercise, what I want you to do is I want you to replace the missing commas. So we've just discussed where the commas should go within a complex sentence, and what I've done is I've taken all of those commas out of these sentences. What you've got to do is you've got to replace those commas, and in part 2 I will give you the answers to these questions. And finally, what you need to do is take these really boring, simple sentences and you need to convert them into complex sentences. Have a go at using a variety of different types of complex sentences. And then in part 2 of this series, I will provide you with some examples of complex sentences using these simple sentences as a basis. Okay, so this has been part 1 of the simple, compound and complex video series. Make sure you subscribe to this channel in order to see part 2, which I will provide answers for those little practices. And also have a look at my other videos, lots of videos on writing techniques and reading techniques for the AQA GCSE English and English language exams. Also follow me on Twitter at Aisha Exams, and head over to my website aishaexams.wordpress.com for lots of useful free downloads.